I've always prided myself on being in control of my business, my life, and even my marriage. My name is Claire Harper, CEO of Nexera Tech, a company I built from nothing more than an idea scribbled on a napkin during a late-night coffee binge. People call me a powerhouse, a trailblazer. They say I'm fearless, but what they don't see are the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, or the cracks beneath the polished surface. I wake up every morning to the view of Central Park from our penthouse balcony, sipping espresso while scrolling through emails. It's beautiful, isn't it? The city sprawls out like a canvas of ambition and possibility. But sometimes, when I glance at Jonathan sitting across the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone with that absent look in his eyes, I wonder if we're just two strangers sharing the same space. Jonathan, he's handsome, charming, and effortlessly likable. Everyone loves him. He's the kind of man who can walk into a room and light it up without even trying. When we first met, I thought he was my perfect counterpart. The calm to my chaos, the steady anchor to my relentless drive. But lately I've started noticing things. The way he avoids conversations about finances, how he brushes off questions about his work, and those late-night business trips that seem to happen too often. I tell myself it's nothing. After all, we're Claire and Jonathan Harper, the golden couple everyone envies. Right. Growing up in Chicago wasn't easy. My dad worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, and my mom juggled odd shifts as a nurse. I learned early on that success doesn't come handed to you. It has to be fought for, clawed at, earned. That's why I poured everything into Nexera Tech. Every deal closed, every investor convinced, every product launched felt like another step toward proving myself. Not just to the world, but to the little girl inside me who used to dream big while staring at the stars outside her bedroom window. Now, here I am, living a life most people only fantasize about. And yet, something feels hollow. Last night, Jonathan came home unusually late again. He said he'd been at some poker game with his buddies. Typical guy stuff, he called it. I didn't press him because, honestly, I was exhausted. Between board meetings, client calls, and strategizing our next move against Apex Innovations, our biggest rival, I barely had time to breathe, let alone interrogate my husband. Still, there was something off about the way he avoided eye contact when I asked if he'd won anything. "Just a few bucks," he muttered before heading upstairs. "A few bucks? Since when does Jonathan play poker for pocket change?" This morning, I decided to take a closer look at our joint credit card statement. Not because I suspected anything. I mean, why would I? We've always kept things transparent, or so I thought. But curiosity got the better of me after spotting a charge labeled Luxury Lounge NYC. What caught my attention wasn't the amount, it was the location. Luxury Lounge sounded more like a high-end strip club than a legitimate expense. I confronted Jonathan over breakfast, holding up the statement like Exhibit A in a courtroom drama. "What's this?" I asked, tapping the line item with my finger. Jonathan barely glanced up from his omelet. "Oh, that? Just drinks with the guys," he said casually, shrugging it off. "Drinks? With whose money?" I wanted to scream, but instead, I forced a tight smile and changed the subject. Deep down, though, a seed of doubt had been planted. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was intuition, but something told me I wasn't seeing the whole picture. It happened yesterday. An email landed in my inbox with no sender name attached. At first, I thought it was spam and almost deleted it. But then I saw the subject line, "You deserve to know." My heart raced as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, dozens of them, from an account I'd never seen before. An account under Jonathan's name. Millions of dollars, neatly stacked away in offshore holdings. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the documents. How could this be real? Where did he get this kind of money? And why would he hide it from me? That evening, I waited until we were alone in the living room. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity. "Jonathan," I began, my voice eerily calm despite the storm brewing inside me, "we need to talk." He looked up from his laptop, eyebrows raised. "About what?" His tone was casual, almost dismissive. I slid the printed statements onto the coffee table between us. "Care to explain these?" For a moment, he froze, his face pale. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Claire, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. Oh, this ought to be good." I hired Liam Carter the very next day. He's one of the best private investigators in New York, a gruff ex-cop with a knack for uncovering secrets. Over coffee at a quiet cafe downtown, I briefed him on everything: the mysterious account, the suspicious charges, and my growing suspicion that Jonathan wasn't telling me the truth. Liam listened intently, jotting notes in a worn leather notebook. By the time we parted ways, I felt a flicker of hope, not because I trusted Jonathan, but because I finally had someone willing to dig where I couldn't. Later that week, Liam sent me his initial findings. As it turns out, Jonathan hadn't just set up one secret account. There were multiple, scattered across different banks and jurisdictions. Some funds traced back to questionable investments made years ago, others to transactions involving properties I knew nothing about. Each revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this really the man I married? The man I trusted with my life, my dreams, my future? The confrontation happened last night, right here in our dining room. I laid out all the evidence on the table: bank statements, property deeds, emails, and watched as Jonathan's face turned shades of red. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "All these years, I gave you everything, my trust, my loyalty, and this is how you repay me." He tried to defend himself, of course. "Claire, listen to me," he pleaded, running a hand through his hair. "I did it for us, for security, for protection. You're always working, always pushing forward. I just wanted to make sure we'd be okay if something went wrong." Security? Protection? Bullshit. If he cared about our security, he wouldn't have lied to me. For hours, we argued, circling each other like predators. He accused me of being cold, distant, obsessed with work. I shot back that his actions spoke louder than any excuse. By the time we finally stopped yelling, the clock read 3 a.m., and neither of us had budged an inch. As I stared at him across the table, I realized something terrifying. I didn't recognize the man sitting in front of me anymore. That night, after the argument, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Jonathan had said. Or rather, every excuse he'd thrown at me. He thinks I'm cold, obsessed with work. Maybe there's some truth to that. But does being driven make me a bad wife? Does wanting security for myself and my future mean I don't care about him? No. What I do know is this: trust is sacred, and once it's broken, it can never fully be repaired. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and went for a run through Central Park, a habit I hadn't indulged in months. As my sneakers pounded against the pavement, I let myself think clearly for the first time in days. Jonathan wasn't going to come clean on his own. If I wanted answers, I'd have to take them. And if I wanted justice, I'd have to fight for it. By the time I got home, sweaty and determined, I had a plan. I called Rachel Monroe, my best friend since college, and now one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in Manhattan. "Rachel," I said without preamble, "I need your help." Rachel arrived at my office later that afternoon, her sharp stilettos clicking against the marble floors. She took one look at the stack of documents on my desk and raised an eyebrow. "Claire," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "this is messy. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" I nodded firmly. "I don't have a choice," I replied. "He made his bed. Now he can lie in it." Rachel smirked, impressed by my resolve. Together, we mapped out a strategy: gather more evidence, freeze Jonathan's access to our shared assets, and prepare for the inevitable fallout. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances at home, smiling through breakfast, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't easy. Every time Jonathan touched my hand or kissed my cheek, I felt nauseous. But I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. One evening, as we sat side by side watching TV, I noticed him glance nervously at his phone. Was he texting someone? Checking his secret accounts? For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew I was winning. Liam's next report arrived 2 days later, and it was a bombshell. Not only had Jonathan been funneling money into offshore accounts for years, but he'd also purchased a luxury villa in St. Bart's under a shell company. A villa! In the Caribbean. My mind reeled. How could he afford something like that? More importantly, why would he need it? Against Rachel's advice, I decided to investigate further. The following weekend, I booked a last-minute flight to St. Bart's under the guise of a business trip. When I arrived at the villa, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. It was stunning, a sprawling estate perched on a cliff overlooking turquoise waters. Inside, the place was immaculate, as though someone lived there regularly. That's when I found them. Photos scattered across a side table, snapshots of Jonathan laughing with a beautiful brunette woman. Her name was Sophia Leclerc, according to the back of one photo. An art curator based in Paris. My stomach churned as I pieced it together. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about betrayal, on every level imaginable. Confronting Jonathan with the photos was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I waited until dinner, setting the images down on the table between us like pieces of evidence in a trial. His face went white as he stared at them, his fork clattering onto his plate. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice eerily calm despite the anger boiling inside me. He didn't answer right away, instead burying his head in his hands. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Her name is Sophia," he admitted. "We met at an art gallery opening last year. It started as nothing, Claire. Just conversations." Then, his voice trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish. For a moment, I considered walking away, letting him rot in his guilt. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was pain, but I needed to hear him say it. "Do you love her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he said, "but I thought about leaving you. For her." Those words hit me like a freight train. Leaving me, after everything we'd built together? I stood abruptly, pushing my chair back so hard it toppled over. "Get out," I said, pointing toward the door. "Now." After Jonathan left, I locked myself in my study and cried, for the first time in years. Not because I still loved him, but because I mourned the loss of what we used to be. Once upon a time, we were partners, equals. Now, all I saw was a man who had lied, cheated, and stolen from me. That's when I realized I couldn't let him walk away scot-free. This wasn't just personal, it was professional. If word got out about his behavior, it could jeopardize Nexera Tech. My legacy. The next morning, I called Rachel again. "We're escalating," I told her. "I want full custody of our assets, and I want him exposed." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Consider it done," she said. Together, we drafted a press release detailing Jonathan's financial misconduct, framing it as a cautionary tale about transparency in relationships. Meanwhile, I reached out to a few trusted contacts in the media, ensuring the story would break exactly when I wanted it to. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about punishing Jonathan, it was about sending a message. No one takes advantage of Claire Harper and gets away with it. The headlines exploded overnight. "Husband hides millions from CEO wife," screamed the front page of the New York Times. Social media lit up with speculation, memes, and hot takes. Jonathan's phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages, but he ignored them all, retreating into silence. His firm suspended him indefinitely pending an investigation, and our friends, once eager to bask in our glamorous lifestyle, suddenly became scarce. Even his poker buddies stopped returning his texts. Watching him crumble was harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to gloat, to revel in his downfall. But another part, the part that remembered the man I fell in love with, felt a pang of sadness. Had it really come to this? Was this the price of seeking justice? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that Jonathan had brought this on himself. Still, as I scrolled through the endless stream of gossip online, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Revenge wasn't enough. The divorce proceedings turned into a media circus, with reporters camped outside the courthouse and cameras flashing every time I stepped out of my car. It was surreal, like living in some twisted reality show where everyone had an opinion about my marriage, and most of them weren't kind. Jonathan's lawyers tried to paint me as the villain, accusing me of being too ambitious, too cold, too unforgiving. She doesn't care about him, they argued in court. All she cares about is her company. But Rachel was ready for them. She presented evidence so damning that even Jonathan's own attorney winced. The offshore accounts, the secret villa, the photos of Sophia, it all came out in brutal detail. At one point, Jonathan took the stand, looking pale and defeated. His voice trembled as he admitted to hiding the money, claiming it was never meant to hurt me. "I just wanted security," he said, his eyes pleading with mine. But I didn't flinch. Security. That excuse might have worked months ago, but not now. Not after everything. Late one night, after another grueling day in court, I found myself standing in front of our wedding photo. We looked so happy then, or at least we pretended to be. I remember the vows we exchanged, promises to stand by each other through thick and thin. Back then, I truly believed we were unstoppable. Now, I wondered how much of it had been real. Rachel noticed my mood during our strategy meeting the next morning. "You okay?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. I hesitated before answering. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I finally admitted. "I mean, exposing him like this, am I any better than him?" Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. "Claire, you're not doing this to destroy him. You're doing it to protect yourself. There's a difference." Her words helped, but they didn't erase the guilt gnawing at me. Was I becoming someone I didn't recognize? Someone who valued power over compassion? Then, out of nowhere, Sophia reached out. A handwritten letter arrived at my office, its envelope bearing French stamps. Inside, she apologized profusely, explaining that she hadn't known about Jonathan's secret accounts or his lies until recently. "He manipulated me too," she wrote. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." At first, I considered ignoring her. Why should I trust her? But something about her vulnerability struck a chord. I called her that evening, and we spoke for hours. She revealed details about Jonathan's double life that confirmed my suspicions and added new ones. By the end of the conversation, I realized she wasn't my enemy. In fact, she could be a powerful ally. Together, we agreed to testify against Jonathan in court, ensuring his actions would come to light no matter what. The final hearing felt like a scene from a movie. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Rachel delivered her closing statement, her words sharp and unrelenting. "This isn't just about money," she declared. "It's about integrity, about accountability. Claire Harper has built her life on honesty and hard work, while Jonathan Harper chose deceit and betrayal. Let this case serve as a reminder that actions have consequences." When it was Jonathan's turn to speak, he broke down completely. Tears streamed down his face as he confessed to everything. The accounts, the villa, the affair. "I was scared," he choked out. "Scared of losing Claire, scared of failing, scared of being overshadowed by her success. So I ran. I lied. And I ruined everything." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I reminded myself of the pain he'd caused, not just to me, but to everyone who trusted him. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of our assets and sole ownership of Nexera Tech. Jonathan walked away with nothing but his name and a mountain of debt. As the gavel struck, I felt relief. Justice had been served. But as I left the courthouse, surrounded by flashing cameras and shouting reporters, I realized something important. Winning didn't make me whole again. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of our penthouse, staring out at the city lights. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages, but I ignored them. Instead, I thought about the journey that brought me here, the sacrifices, the heartbreaks, the lessons learned. Yes, I had won, but part of me still mourned the loss of what could have been. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I sold the Hamptons estate and donated the proceeds to charity, symbolizing my decision to leave the past behind. I reconnected with old friends, joined a yoga class, and rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. Jonathan disappeared from the public eye, retreating to God knows where to lick his wounds. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about him, rumors of him working odd jobs, trying to rebuild his reputation. Part of me hoped he'd find peace, but I knew our paths would never cross again. What we had was gone, reduced to ashes. And honestly, I was okay with that. One weekend, I flew back to Chicago to visit my parents. Walking through the streets of my childhood neighborhood felt strange yet comforting, like slipping into an old sweater. Over dinner, Mom asked how I was holding up. "It's been tough," I admitted, "but I'm learning to let go of the things I can't change." Dad nodded approvingly. You've always been strong, Claire. Don't lose sight of that. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table writing a letter to my younger self. Dear Claire, I began, life will knock you down more times than you think possible. People will disappoint you, betray you, and break your heart. But don't let them dim your light. Keep fighting. Keep believing in yourself. Because in the end, the only person you can truly rely on is you. When I finished, I tucked the letter into a drawer, feeling lighter than I had in years. A few months later, I met Ethan Parker at a charity gala. He was an architect with kind eyes and a warm smile, someone who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Not my title, not my wealth, just me. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories about our lives and dreams. For the first time in forever, I felt a spark of hope. But I took things slow, wary of rushing into another relationship. Instead, I focused on nurturing my friendship with Ethan, savoring the simplicity of connection without expectation. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent me a heartfelt apology letter, which I read but chose not to respond to. Some wounds heal best when left untouched. The Women's Empowerment Conference was held in a sleek auditorium downtown, filled with ambitious entrepreneurs, activists, and leaders from all walks of life. I sat backstage, clutching my notes and trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. Public speaking had never been my Achilles heel, but this felt different. This wasn't just about sharing my story, it was about owning it. When my name was announced, I stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Good morning, I began, my voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. My name is Claire Harper, and if you've read the headlines recently, you know my personal life has been anything but private. The audience chuckled softly, easing some of the tension. I went on to recount my journey, the rise of Nexera Tech, the cracks in my marriage, and the painful unraveling of everything I thought I knew. What I learned through all of this, I said, pausing for emphasis, is that true strength doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing it head-on, learning from it, and emerging stronger on the other side. Afterward, dozens of women approached me, thanking me for my honesty and courage. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and resilience, while others simply hugged me, tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, I realized something profound. My pain wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a beacon of hope for others navigating similar storms. A few weeks later, I received an email from Jonathan. It was brief, polite, and devoid of excuses or apologies. Claire, he wrote, I know words can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. You deserve happiness, and I hope you find it. Take care. Reading his message stirred conflicting emotions within me. Anger, sadness, pity, but ultimately I felt nothing. No rage, no longing, no regret. Just emptiness. And strangely, that emptiness felt like freedom. That weekend, I visited the penthouse one last time before putting it on the market. As I wandered through the rooms, memories flooded back. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments that once felt so intimate. But instead of clinging to them, I let them go. Standing on the balcony for the final time, I whispered a silent goodbye, not just to Jonathan, but to the version of myself who believed love could conquer all. Then I turned and walked away, leaving the door open behind me. With the proceeds from the penthouse sale, I launched a new initiative at Nexera Tech called Women Rising, aimed at supporting female entrepreneurs and promoting transparency in business practices. The program quickly gained traction, earning praise from industry leaders and media outlets alike. For the first time in years, I felt aligned with my purpose, not just as a CEO, but as a mentor and advocate. Ethan and I continued seeing each other, taking things slow but steadily growing closer. He introduced me to his world: art galleries, hiking trails, late-night conversations under the stars, and I found myself falling not just for him, but for the simplicity of connection without pretense. One evening, as we strolled along the High Line, he took my hand and smiled. "You're amazing, you know that," he said. I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Amazing? Maybe. But more importantly, I was finally happy. Meanwhile, Jonathan resurfaced in the news, not as a disgraced banker, but as a volunteer at a community center in Brooklyn. According to interviews, he'd spent months working with at-risk youth, teaching financial literacy, and offering mentorship. I made mistakes, he told a reporter. Big ones. But I'm trying to make amends, however small they may be. Watching the segment, I felt a flicker of admiration. Was he genuinely changing, or was this another act? I couldn't say for sure. What mattered was that he seemed to be finding his footing again, even if it was far removed from the glittering world we'd once inhabited together. One afternoon, Rachel called me with an update. "Guess who reached out to us?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Your ex-husband. He wants to settle any remaining legal disputes quietly." I sighed, considering the offer. Fighting him further would only prolong the bitterness, and honestly, I was tired of looking backward. "Let him have it," I replied. "Whatever closure he needs, give it to him. I'm done." The series concludes on a crisp autumn morning, with me standing on the balcony of my new apartment, a cozy loft in Tribeca overlooking the Hudson River. The city buzzed below, alive with energy and possibility. My phone buzzed with notifications, but I ignored them, choosing instead to savor the stillness.